Welcome back to the Kid Speed channel. Today we're going to fix the wheel bearings on this Mototec Mud Monster 98cc gas go-kart. You can see on this one here, I can move this axle up and down. At first it started with a little bit of noise. I was wondering what it was, and I realized the bearing in there has actually obliterated itself and needs to be replaced. Luckily, these are pretty inexpensive. I'll show you on the camera here. These are 6004 2RS bearings. They're pretty readily available. This is what they look like, and they just slide directly onto the axle and can be pretty easily replaced. I'll show you how. What are some of the tools you're going to need? First thing, 21mm socket or 21mm wrench to take these wheel nuts off. An impact will come in really handy for these wheel nuts if you want to cheat like I do. You'll need some kind of crescent wrench along the way. I've used these to kind of tap the bearings into place. I'm sure there's a professional tool for this, but I don't have it, so I have a couple of different types of crescent wrench. These are pretty readily and cheaply available at your local hardware store. I've got a couple of different pry bars. These will be used to get the old bearings, the old bearing shell out if there's any pieces left in there. This is the standard model, and this is the it really won't come out model. Again, both of these were really cheap. I think this was $6 or $7, this was $10 or $15. So one thing I'll say to you is, don't be intimidated by these types of jobs. Every time you do something like this, you learn something about the kart, and you get a really good appreciation for how it hangs together, and it's a lot of fun too. So stay with me. Part of the process here is actually going to be taking this cover off and getting the chain off the machine. You're going to see these two bolts here that we're going to have to take off with the 10mm socket. We go around a little bit here. On the front, there's one more 10mm we're going to have to do to get the chain cover off. Let's go ahead. All right, let's go ahead and take these 10mm bolts off. You can cheat a little bit and use an impact wrench if you've got one. You can see I'm putting my finger behind here a little bit just to hold that bolt in place. Make it a little bit easier to get off. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take these wheels off first, then I'm going to go and loosen up the motor, and we'll be able to slacken this chain and take this chain off. I'm going to cheat a little bit here and use this impact wrench to take the wheels off. Give me a second here. Now make sure as you do this, there's this little metal piece that sits in there. You're going to need that later, so make sure you keep that, the wheel, in a safe place. All right, we're going to get under here and loosen these 4 bolts underneath here to loosen the engine so we can get the chain off. You can see there are 4 bolts underneath here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are 13mm bolts. All right, so I'm going to start on number 1 of these 4 bolts here. As I said, this is 13mm. It's nice if you have a ratcheting wrench. You'll see how this works right now. Let's start to loosen this bolt. You heard that crack there. I can just ratchet this back nicely so I get this nice and loose here. I'm going to go through and do all 4. All right, now these two are going to be the ones that you loosen or tighten if you want to loosen or tighten the chain. So basically these bolts here, when you tighten them, these bolts come back, pull the whole engine back, and tighten this chain up. Right now I'm going to loosen them off. As I said before, this is a 12mm. You can see there's actually 2 bolts here that are kind of moving together. All right. You can see there's a little bit of a space now between this bolt and the chassis here of the go-kart. This will allow you to move the engine back and forward if you've loosened your bolt underneath enough. In most cases, you wouldn't be loosening the chain. You're going to be tightening it if it's coming off because it's a little bit loose. So to loosen this right up, I really had to back off those bolts underneath the motor, and that allowed me to move the motor forward and loosen this chain up. So now it's nice and loose. Take some photos, don't be afraid, grab your smartphone, take photos of how everything is together, just in case you get stuck when you're putting it back together. So now you can just set the chain to the side a bit and turn this gear around and you'll have that chain come off. Just sit that chain behind there nicely, that'll allow this axle to come out. Next step is to take this brake caliper off. There's another 13mm bolt. Just get these undone. Take this off and make sure these parts are somewhere nice and safe. A good way to make sure you don't lose your bolts is you just put them back where they came from. We're going to put those two in there and set this brake caliper aside. The first time I did this, I made the mistake of undoing all of these Allen bolts, which is really not necessary. All you need to do is take this piece off, and this, with a little bit of persuasion, slides right off. And there's another one of these little pieces of metal. This little metal key goes right in that slot there and holds that to the axle. So make sure you don't lose it. All right, now that you've got that one brake side loose, you should be able to just slide this axle all the way out like this. You can see this bearing on this side too is also broken. And there's a little piece of bearing right here. We're going to take that off and throw that away. It looks like both sides needed replacing. So good we're doing this. All right, so looking at the engine side of the Kart here, this is what the inside of this axle housing should look like. We'll clean some of that dust out of there. But you can see there's a good lip here, and that's right there is where the bearing sits. We're gonna go to the other side. We're on the other side of the Kart here, and if you look closely, you have no lip here. We'll get over there, you can see it's pretty much smooth here. There's a piece of metal in there that moves back and forward with my finger. That's the piece stuck in there, and that's where a lot of people get stuck with this job. I'm going to show you how to fix that. That's where our pry bar comes in. I would recommend starting with something like this. This is a 24-inch gooseneck wrecking bar. I think this was $13, so really a good investment. Looks like I'm going to have to stabilize it a little more. Hang on. You can see in there now, it's a nice clean area. So I'm going to use a bit of brake cleaner to clean out inside this axle housing here and get all those filings out, along with a bit of paper or shop rag. All right. Just wipe this out a little bit. So here's about what that housing should look like when you're done. Notice in there, that's just a little bit of wear from where that bearing broke. That's not actually metal filings, but it's nice and clean in there. It'll provide a good housing for the new bearing. Okay, now we've got this nice and clean, we're gonna need to pop this sprocket off the axle. Again, you don't need to undo all these bolts here. This will just slide right off, and I'll show you how. So grab your crescent wrench. This just gives you a little bit of a surface to spread the force around a little bit. Just put a little bit of force on the wrench here. Put that force pretty... Now again, a little piece of bearing here, and another one of these little metal keys here. So please don't lose that, keep that safe, and also remember which way your axle goes. All right, so here's our new bearings. I'm going to slide these on here first, all the way up there. Now, this again is the sprocket side, so we'll have to remember that. So with our crescent wrench again, just apply a little gentle force down here to get this bearing on. This is the side where the brake caliper goes. So we're going to slide this axle right in here. You can see now that makes a nice snug fit, and those bearings are in great shape. Get the other side in here. All right, you can see here as I push those in, it's pushed us out on the other side here. So I slid this side back in, and we'll keep going here on the other side. I'm going to hold this bearing in with my right hand, reach over with my left, and then push them together nicely so they go together. I'm going to go ahead and put our sprocket back on. Now, if you took your photos and you were paying attention, you'll know these little nuts, or the heads of these little nuts. You can see the heads here. This goes on the outside. You've got to put this little metal key in right here. Move that. You can see that right there. Got that little metal key in place, which is what's going to hold this sprocket in place. Got this piece goes on right here. We've got this other piece, this other key right here, goes in to hold our wheel on. Take your chain. And the old trick with the chain, if you didn't know, for those who didn't ever have to fix a broken chain on a bicycle, just start it there. Roll it round. Oops, she's a little tight there. There seemed to be a little bit of a mystery here about why I had to back this chain off so much. And here's what I think happened. When those bearings broke, this shaft came loose, the chain loosened, chain popped off, I tightened the chain, not realizing the bearings were broken. And so now I tightened that chain up to the point where I put the bearings back on, the chain was really tight. So just know that if that happens to you, you're gonna have to really back the chain off if you've tightened it earlier. Now, if you're watching this and the chain popped off and you realize it popped off because the bearings went bad, then you're in luck and you don't have to worry about it. Okay, we're gonna repeat the steps on this side. Metal key in there. Again, if you're paying attention, these heads were on the outside when you put this, when you pulled this off, so they got to go back the same way. You got to line up this little piece here, right there, with that metal key in order to get that to slot. Okay, so you'll see there, when that's on nice, it actually moves the axle. And then we slide this metal collar on there as well. Okay. Now we're ready to put this brake caliper on. We took the bolts from this and stuck them in the back, so you'll just have to take these back out again. Be careful with the brake pads in there. You should be able to slide that right back where it was. And then put those bolts back in. Remember again, you have this metal key to put back in. Sits back in there like that. Wheel goes back on, make sure the tire valve is on the outside. Hand tighten the nut first, and feel free to go ahead with your impact. Now on this side, we're going to want to make sure this chain tension is correct, and we tighten up the engine and these bolts at the back. Okay, you can see here, there's not much slack in this chain. This chain's actually a little bit too tight, so I'm going to loosen that one up before going ahead. I snugged up those bolts for the engine quite a bit, not quite all the way, so I can still adjust the chain a little bit. I've got a good bit of slack in here. I might tighten that up just a little bit. All right, I think that's going to be pretty good. Okay, I'm going to tighten up all 4 bolts underneath the engine now and get this last wheel back on. Give the wheel a spin. We're going to put a bit of chain lubricant on here before we're done. Make sure everything's nice and tight. Get that chain cover back on and you're ready to go. Thanks for watching.